You're watching News at Prime. Let's pick up on another important discussion. The world tomorrow will be marking Workers' Day, which is aimed at uplifting and protecting the rights of employees. There are calls for the South African government to do more to improve the situation, despite some of the advances made. Let's speak about this now, and we are joined by Cosatu's General Secretary, Solly Phetoe. In a moment, we're hoping to be joined by the National Union of Metal Workers of South Africa spokesperson, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. But for the time being, we're also joined by the labour expert, Andrew Levy. To both of you, gentlemen, thank you for making time for this important discussion. Can I start with you, Mr. Phetoe? 30 years on, or should we say 30 years of democracy in South Africa, where would you say workers stand today?
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to your viewers, and good evening to all the panelists. Well, from our side as a federation, we would say 30 years in celebration, the 30th anniversary of our democracy, but also celebrating the May Day since 1994. There are a number of gains that we have gained in terms of improving the conditions of workers. And we are not saying that is 100%, but we see better than before 1994, as we continue to make sure that we fight for more improvement of the conditions of workers, which include the salary, improvement of the salary of the workers, but also improving the legislation that governs the workers at the workplace.
Yeah. Mr. Levy, let's bring you into the conversation. This is a space that you watch very closely. Mr. Phetoe talks about improvements in the conditions of workers, including their rights. Are you able to spell out what some of those are?
I certainly am. And, it's a pleasure to find myself in agreement with the General Secretary. But I just want to make one point before I begin. We know our unions have a political bent towards socialism. We know that in many areas of thought, specifically Leninist thought, I talk about Lenin here, not John Lennon, the less famous one, Vladimir Ilyich Lenin. He regarded trade unions as being the battlefront, the forefront of the workers' revolution, which would usher in the glorious state. Well, they've manifestly failed to do that all over the world. So that's not a success, but what they have done is materially improved not only the conditions of employment of workers, and I speak around the world, I speak specifically for South Africa, but they have, perhaps more importantly, given workers dignity and self-respect. Now, we can find so many areas where this happens. They've protected workers against arbitrary actions of employers, against unilateral changes in employment. They have pioneered the introduction of protective legislation. Now, many employers, some commentators feel our legislation has gone too far, that there are abuses of the unfair dismissal regime. But nevertheless, conditions are much better there. If you look at collective bargaining as a means of setting wages, we can point out very clearly a differential in wages and earnings. In other words, they're not the same for people who are doing the same job, but those who are unionized and have their wages set by collective bargaining will earn more, and often significantly more than their non-unionized brethren. So all of those are very significant benefits which the union movement have gained, and have gained at some cost, and have gained with dedication and their eyes on the prize. So I think one must honor them for that and respect them for that.
Yeah. Let's bring into the conversation Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, the spokesperson of the union Numsa, which belongs into the Cosatu fold. Ms. Hlubi-Majola, good evening to you, and thank you for making time for this conversation. Both the gentlemen I've spoken to thus far are saying that there have been major improvements in worker conditions, worker rights, since the period 1994 up until where we are today. Does Numsa share in this particular optimism that workers' rights have indeed, there have been some gains along the way?
Good evening, Oli, and good evening to your viewers, and thank you so much for having me on the show. I think Workers' Day is a very important day and definitely should be celebrated because, as workers, we really have made significant gains. If you look at South Africa, for example, the fall of apartheid was primarily because of the unity of organized labor, where it utilized its strength in the workplace to advance an agenda to end the apartheid system. The very fact that we have a progressive labor relations regime in post-apartheid South Africa has everything to do with the blood, sweat, and tears and the sacrifices made by generations of African workers prior to the 1994 democratic breakthrough. The very fact that, for example, tomorrow is a public holiday is because of the work of trade unions. The fact that you have weekends, the fact that you have paid leave, that you have maternity leave, that you even have paternity leave, all of these are things that unions have achieved. And if we can summarize it, we can say that unions have actually democratized the workplace. Unions are playing a very instrumental role in tackling inequality. We have a national minimum wage, for example. Yes, Numsa's position is that it's too low, but we have a national minimum wage. And that is because workers fought for that minimum wage. So the fact that we have improved conditions, the fact that there are benefits that thousands, millions of workers in this country are benefiting from are all as a result of the hard work of unions. Unions play a very instrumental role in uniting workers around a common agenda. So yes, we can definitely say that things have radically improved for workers, certainly in the last 30 years, but we could definitely do more. This is Numsa's position that we could do more, especially because we feel that the current government of the day has really not done enough to ensure that by far the majority of people in this country are able to benefit from this democracy.
Mr. Phetoe, let's come to you. If we use South Africa's unemployment statistics, and I'm going to track back to 1994, at that time, if indeed the information I've read is correct, it says that in 1994 there was 20% unemployment. Fast forward to 2024, and we sit at nearly 33% of unemployment. Is that a good enough job that's been done by the government of the day, including, of course, let's not forget, the private sector, who are quick to retrench workers when the hard times come along?
Well, thank you very much once more. That's not good. It doesn't look good compared before 1994 and comparing the unemployment rate of today. And as the Trade Union Federation, we've been raising this matter every time. And the issue about the retrenchment or the unemployment is not only the responsibility of government alone to make sure that there's a job protection, or we're able to preserve the current job. The private sector has a role to play. You will recall, I'm going to continue to remind you that you will recall when we called for economic crisis in 2018, 2019, compelling the President of the Republic of South Africa to convene what is called National Job Summit. Both government and private sectors, business in particular, BUSA, made a commitment to protect the current jobs, but also to make sure that there's a job creation. it has not happened like that. In particular, from the side of the private sector, from the business side, we saw an investment strike in terms of creating jobs. So yes, you are correct. If you compare the 1994, before 1994 and the current now, the unemployment rate today is very high, which is a cry to us as Cosatu, as a trade union movement, which is the matter that we're continuing to fight. And that's why we've gone to NATLEC, still fighting for the amendment of Section 189, which employers are using for their own benefit in terms of consultation. Now, we said, as Cosatu in our Congress, we must continue to fight to make Section 189 very difficult for the employer to come up to use it to bench workers every time. As we speak today, we've got mining workers that are facing to continue to raise them publicly, but also to challenge our government, but also challenge business, particularly the social partners at the level of NATLEC.
Yeah. Andrew Levy, can I bring the same question toward your end? The unemployment crisis in South Africa. What is your analysis of why it is that it is sky high? Could it have to do with the economic policies that are followed by the government of the day?
Look, the causes of unemployment are complex and multi-causal. But, let's talk about some of the things that we are celebrating today, namely the trade union movement. But maybe just pause for a moment to reflect. Now, we've heard a comment that employers retrench for their own benefit, and that Section 189 must make it harder to retrench. Employers don't retrench if they can make a profit. They retrench because they are fighting to survive, and they've got to cut costs in order to save their business and save jobs. So the notion that this is the evil employer is not necessarily true. And certainly you are not going to protect jobs by making retrenchments more difficult. You're in fact going to destroy jobs. Now, why are employers retrenching? And the simple reason is that this economy is not growing. In fact, it's more or less just been in the last 24 hours, 48 hours, the growth forecast for this year has been revised downwards once again by the IMF to below 1%. Now, on that basis, we can never solve unemployment, particularly with a growing number of entrants to the labor market. Now, we heard about the Job Summit, which was a very, very good creation. And we must remember that the undertaking to create jobs was dependent on certain other actions from government, also from trade unions, which didn't necessarily materialize. So we've got to be careful of the evil employer subtext. But if we look at the current unemployment situation, which threatens every one of us, if we look at the half of our population that lives in abject poverty, we are in a crisis situation. We should declare war on unemployment, and we should look for the equivalent, industrially speaking, of a government of national unity. In other words, employers, government, and unions should get together and cooperate in reducing unemployment by looking at labor markets. And they are not going to do that by making retrenchment that much more difficult.
Yeah.
So there really needs to be a focus here. And it's just too simple to blame the evil employer. Now, to come back to the first part of your question, then I'll hand it over. Does government have some blame to shoulder in this? Without any question at all. We had a decade of state capture, of absolute looting and plundering of our precious national resources. We have the Eskom crisis, which again was another own goal. Where was government there? These are all quasi-government institutions. We have ongoing corruption. We have a situation where a very, very small number of people are the only beneficiaries of BEE. And that is a situation where, to be blunt about it, all we've done is replace a ruling class who could be recognized by being white and a majority of people being black with a ruling class, a small ruling class, which can be recognized as being non-white, and still huge numbers of people who are both black and white suffering. And as long as we are in different corners, we're never going to get this sorted out.
If you're just joining us, a very good evening to you. We are in conversation with the labour federations, unions, and indeed a labour expert. Let's come to you, Phakamile Hlubi-Majola. Today, we are reporting on this channel about Impala, Platinum, Anglo-American, and Sibanye Stillwater, who are all announcing plans to retrench workers because they are saying that the prices of platinum are lower, including the issue of inflation. But Andrew Levy says we must be careful not to stigmatize employers because what they are fighting to do is to survive, first of all, but second of all, keep workers, at least those that won't be retrenched, in their jobs. Do you agree with the sentiment?
I think the thing that's not being spoken about specifically by Andrew Levy is the failure of the capitalist system to genuinely transform the lives of the majority of people. We were told that in 1994, if we advanced democracy, then democracy will bring with it improved quality of life, access to education, access to decent healthcare for all. Except what we got in 1994 was a capitalist system which has been entrenched under the ANC government with neoliberal economic policies, which are failing everywhere in the world. They're failing in the UK, they're failing in America. There is nowhere in the world where capitalism can talk about being a successful system for the benefit of the majority of people. Where we see systems that are more progressive, that benefit the majority of people, you look to countries like China, where China is a communist country which has mobilized institutions such as the state-owned entities to work tirelessly when it comes to job creation. When you look at, I'm interested in the statistic that you mentioned earlier at the beginning of this, where you said under apartheid, apparently unemployment was at 20%. Now, the problem with that statistic is we're not sure if they were incorporating African labor into that statistic, because as you know, apartheid was all about excluding African labor. Yeah. But what we do know is that under apartheid, the apartheid government, racist and fascist and backward as it was at least utilizing state-owned entities as a mechanism to drive the economy and to guarantee employment specifically of white workers. Come 1994 and the democratic breakthrough, suddenly the ANC government is no longer listening to the demands of the masses and the working class that actually assisted them in overthrowing the apartheid system. They're busy listening to the banks and international finance capital, who are all saying that they must privatize state-owned entities. State-owned entities are a very, very effective vehicle for building value chains, for dealing with joblessness. And we see this in China and other parts of the world where the government has taken a direct decision to intervene directly in the economy in order to create jobs. Yeah. As a union, we reject the notion that only business creates jobs. That's a complete fallacy. This is where this government is failing, because this government has allowed itself to be the whipping boy of capital. They do whatever capital demands that they should do. And this is why today we are the most unequal society in the world for the benefit of a small minority of people who are mostly white. Yeah. And that will not change until the macroeconomic framework of South Africa is completely transformed and geared towards benefiting the majority of people. Even what's happening at ESCOM's woes are primarily because the state has taken a decision to step back. It stopped funding maintenance programs. It started to privatize energy. And this is what happens when you privatize energy. If you look at any other country in the world where privatization of state utilities has taken place, it's resulted in massive job losses and higher costs for the consumer.
Mr. Phetoe, let's come to you. Perhaps final comments. And I want to talk about the national minimum wage. In February this year, the Labour Minister announced that this would increase from 25 Rand 42 cents to 27 Rand 58 cents per hour for each ordinary worker. Is that good enough?
Well, it's not enough, but as Hlubi, she has said, is that we have been fighting for the national minimum wage even before 1994. And we said once we achieve the national minimum wage, we will then get into the space of fighting for the living wage. 27 Rand 58 cents it does not link with the cost of living in this country. But for workers, you're referring to the domestic workers, you're referring to the farm workers, you're referring to the security workers, you're referring to the construction workers who does not have the collectible. There's a sexual determination. People say that some employers say it's better to be under the sexual determination than to be under the national minimum wage. And our argument is that under sexual determination, there is no benefit. That is why Cosatu says all workers in South Africa, in terms of the law, in terms of the, I remember Numsa is one of the union that took the matter of the 3 months, after 3 months being working as a temporary worker. Numsa took that matter to constitutional court and they won the case. It means that worker must be employed as a permanent worker so that he gets benefit. So it's not enough. That's why, as Cosatu said, we are now entering a space of a living wage.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that we want to say in terms of the benefit, if you look at to the benefit of the rights of the workers today, over 900,000 domestic workers who did not qualify for the compensation injury on duty today, they are covered. For domestic workers who were not part of the UIF, who were not being qualified, who did not be regarded as employees, who can be able to claim the maternity leave and claim the UIF. Today they are qualified. Those are some of the rights of the workers that we are celebrating tomorrow. But as I said, that's not enough. There's a lot that we need to do. That's what we are going to do, and that's what we, as one country, one federation, will be able to defeat the enemy. And the only enemy of the workers is capitalism.
All right. To all of my guests, I'm sorry I couldn't come to you for final thoughts, Andrew Levy and Phakamile Hlubi-Majola, but I do thank you for your time and indeed your contribution to this discussion as we look ahead to Workers' Day tomorrow.